video is going to be short and sweet, but it's about you being able to propose experimental design changes. Okay, so it's for you to be able to look at someone else's setup and say, okay, this was good. Okay, so check, they did this right, but they need to change this. They need to adjust. They need to rethink one of their processes. So some of the words we're gonna do is we're gonna come up with words that we can use in order to kindly say that what they did kind of failed. So the number one thing is you only want one independent variable. Okay, so you want to be able to clearly identify that and clearly know that only one factor was influencing the whole experiment. Now, with humans, it's very hard to have just one independent variable, because if you have just one, if you have a human, they're influenced by so many different things in life. So you try to keep things as much the same as possible. So if you were doing a test on humans, one of the things we would look at is we would want the same sex. Okay, so use all males or all females. Same age. Sometimes in tests they do the same race, because different genetics can influence different medicines. Sometimes they mix it up because it doesn't have an effect. If you're testing medicine, you want them to have maybe the same health. So if you're testing medicine for diabetes, you want them all to have diabetes. So same, okay? Sometimes they get them from the same part of the world. Sometimes they get people from all over. It just depends on how you want to set it up. But only one independent variable, keeping everything else the same as possible. When we had our animals and we gave them a choice chamber, you wanted to kind of keep it like the same amount of food. Oops, that looks a little bigger. So a block of ham, a block of cheese, a block of cucumber, and I don't know, a block of peanut butter or something. And then you put all your little organisms in the middle so that everything is fair and square, and then they can go where they want to go. They can choose. So in this experiment, your independent variable is the food choice. Okay, so you're giving them multiple food choices. The dependent variable is their choice. Now, constants, we want to use all the same insects. They start in the center. Okay, and some of you who did mice, that was very hard because they were all over the place. And some of you did a very good job. You didn't feed them all night long, so when you put them down, they were all hungry. So we'll say that, because that would make a difference. If you just fed them and then you put them in the box, then that's a different variable, because now they're full. They're not really interested in food. If you put different dishes, or if you put different amounts, then you could actually influence the situation, because if there was an overabundance, then they could all share, or it might have a higher smell. If you put them in different containers, they might actually avoid the container. I think we found that with some of our, maybe the worms, that they would avoid areas just because they didn't like the type of dirt that person used. So if these had been earthworms and you had all different dirt and different food, then you have two variables. So you want to keep all things constant. All right, and then you want to have a control. Now, in this experiment, it depended on the animal and it depended on the situation. Some of you gave them different environments, and so your control was nothing, just the box. And we found that some of the animals actually preferred the box, like nothing. Some of you had aquariums and you had different environments, and then you had nothing in an area or whatever. So in this situation, the control was either what we knew was their favorite food, okay, and then some of you had water as your control, just like nothing. So if you have an experiment and you're analyzing it, you're number one looking for only one independent variable. If they have more than one, then you need to critique them on that and say that they actually could have had multiple things influence. If they had a heat lamp over here, so it was hot, but they had this area in the shade, then now you have two variables going on and you don't know if they're going towards the heat or are they going towards the food. Are they going towards the shade or are they going towards the food? So you want to be able to critique the amount of variables and fix it. Okay, so you need to be able to identify what's wrong and then also support why it's wrong, and the reason it's wrong is because there's too many variables, and then you want to be able to change it. Another thing is opinions. Okay, if this person is like doing some sort of an opinion, you've got to say that's wrong. You cannot test opinions, all right? So we're not asking the insects questions. We are monitoring their movement to these different areas. Time. This is what y'all kill me on, okay? I'm not actually asking you to do this experiment, and neither is College Board. They want to know if you did this experiment, what would be a good amount of time. And time is very important. If you did this experiment for 5 minutes, your results aren't going to be very valid. But if you do this experiment for 5 hours, then you have a good collection of time. If you do it for 5 days, you have it even better. So more time is better, but be realistic. Don't like tell them you're going to do it for 12 years. And then if they're doing an experiment on humans, you definitely want to do a lot of trials. Okay, all right. And the more trials you do, and you get the same or similar results, okay, then you can say your conclusion is valid. But if you do one trial, that's a no-no, okay? So that's another thing that you could analyze or critique someone else's experiment with and say they didn't do enough trials. They need to have more trials, more data. They didn't do it for a long enough time. So you kids are really critical, so you're very good at critiquing things. So use it to your advantage on this question. All right, so your hypothesis, they may ask you to identify what is the hypothesis of the experiment. So the hypothesis is if, okay, and that's going to be your independent variable. So if I change the temperature, okay, it's very not specific, okay? You're going to get specific in your experimental setup. But if I do this, change the temperature, change the pH, change the amount of water, give them food options, then dependent variable will occur, okay? Once again, I'm not being specific. If I change the temperature, then the growth rate will change. If I change the pH, then the lifespan will change, okay? Do not predict here, okay? This is very, very vanilla, okay? Your hypothesis is if I do this, then I think this will happen, okay? Your prediction is where you can say, if I change as the pH gets more acidic, then more insects will die, or the pH is going to change their lifespan, and I think that the pH of 10 will be their favorite, or whatever, okay? Prediction is where you can get into your opinion, but a hypothesis is very generic. And then we have our good old favorite null hypothesis, okay? And the null hypothesis says if I do the independent variable, then what, okay? And null says there will be no effect, okay? And that means that whatever you're testing, actually it doesn't have an effect. And sometimes, y'all, that happens. Lots of times it happens. So if it has no effect, then you accept the null, okay? If you see that something has occurred and there is an effect and it's very measurable, then you reject your null, okay? And what was that fun mathematical way that we could validate to accept or reject? All right, and we can validate and accept or reject based on chi-square. Okay, and chi-square formula is on your formula sheet, and everybody should have a formula sheet. And so your chi-square is your O minus E squared divided by your E. Okay, so you're observed. Okay, and that's your what you see, what happens, expected, and we'll do some different expected situations and how you could calculate expected. But this would be what would be expected if your independent variable had no effect. Okay, so with our insects, if we gave them 4 choices, we would take the total and divide by 4. If it was a temperature, then our expected would be the temperature and different things. So we'll get into that. So all divided by your expected. Okay, and that's where you do it. So observed minus expected squared divided by expected. Okay, and then we do it for every situation, and we will calculate some chi-square for homework, and then we'll go over the answers and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so you need to get your formula sheets out, you need to get out your calculator so that you're ready to do some calculations, and you will find your classwork on your Google Docs.